Hello. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome, everybody, from wherever you are in the world. As you can see, there's plenty of us across different time zones here. Warmly welcoming you. I'm Shafi Musaddiq, the news editor of Alliance Magazine. We really appreciate that you join us for today's webinar, and further appreciation goes to our partners for today's webinar, Myriad Alliance. Today's discussion is incredibly pertinent to the moment that we find ourselves in, as traditional funding sources from governments and international institutions shrink. Private philanthropy is being called upon to fill the gap. In Latin America, where both wealth and need are growing across diverse communities, the question arises, how can philanthropic resources be effectively mobilized to reach those who need them most? Before we delve into the discussion, I have a few housekeeping rules for you to know about. There are two ways you can get involved. Firstly, feel free to introduce yourself using the chat function on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. You should be able to see a little speech bubble. You can also use this chat if you're having any issues with your audio or video. Our team are on hand behind the scenes if you need help. You can also put questions to our panelists at any time using the Slido Q&A on the right-hand side of your screen, as well as asking your own. You'll also be able to upvote others if you'd like to see that question asked. We'll be keeping an eye out throughout the webinar, and I'll be selecting questions to put to our panelists during the Q&A at the end. And finally, should you wish to do so, on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a CC button. This allows for closed captioning. We have that in English and we have that in several languages, including Spanish today. We encourage you to use this if you need it. So we have three magnificent speakers for you today. We have Monica Carillo Zagara from Myriad USA. Monica has extensive experience working with nonprofits, achieving UN-guided law reforms on gender and racial equity. She was regional director of Latin America at Thousand Currents, leading grant making at the expansion and expanding strategies. Monica has been recognized for her work as a global lead in the field by the likes of the UN and the Americas Council. We also have Mario Rosett, an influential figure in civic society, and he's co-founded a number of organizations, including Donar Online, where he is currently the CEO. Mario works within the intersection of digital technology and long-term financial sustainability. Over the last 10 years, both he and his team at Donar Online have helped over 9,000 nonprofits to raise over 1 million US dollars, becoming one of the largest fundraising platforms in the region. And finally, we have Molly Van Horn from Tawingo Fund. Molly has served as the founding executive director of Tawingo Fund for the past decade. She has helped shaped the strategy and developed deep relationships with grantee partners. Tawingo Fund is based in Boston in the US and focuses on international giving for small to medium-sized organizations in Latin America, Africa, as well as Southeast Asia. So, Molly, I'm going to start with you because before we look forward in many ways in this discussion, it's worth just pausing and looking at where we are right now with the biggest story of the year, which is the effective dismantling of USAID. And in 2023 and 24, USAID, according to some estimates, allocated around $1.9 billion to both Latin America and the Caribbean. Could you paint the picture of where the most severe funding gaps and shortages have appeared? And what is the impact to those in Latin America on the front line, particularly in areas such as democracy, civil society, community cohesion?
Great. Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Thumbs up.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you for having me on this call. I'm honored to be here. And I just want to caveat this by saying I am absolutely no expert in USAID or what's going on in the region from USAID, But I recently did have a um, former USAID staffer lead a call that I led. And so I have a lot of different takeaways from that. So I'm going to speak to that. I think I wanted to first just preface that it is estimated that the region receives, the latest data we have is that the region receives around 700 million per year from US foundations. So with the loss of close to $2 billion, there's no way that private philanthropy can make up the gap. So we have to kind of just do our best with what we're dealing with. And so, as I said, I recently hosted a conversation that was led by with some new Latin American funders that was led by a former USAID senior advisor to Latin America, and heard what he had to say about the loss of funding and what sort of the biggest risks were to the region and the biggest opportunities for philanthropists. And for me, the big takeaways were that the funding loss really, the loss of USAID really has two huge impacts on the region. One being USAID was a coordinating presence across the governments, society, corporations. And so that coordinating element being gone leaves a huge gap, right? That's what that's something that I hadn't personally thought about, but is I think really important. And the second is that USAID was doing a lot to protect civil society by fighting the drug trafficking and cartels. And there's a significant risk to the region with the loss of USAID, and they're already seeing signs of what were stable, much stable governments, stable countries for a long time, such as Costa Rica, having some really big red flags around potential challenges that they're already going to be facing. So that was sort of the two big key gaps that I saw that he felt that USAID was going to leave. And I think the big opportunities for philanthropy, there was a couple different components. One being um, locally led organizations. I think none of us think of USAID as really funding locally led organizations, but in fact, they were doing a huge pilot in the region around trying to focus on more locally led organizations. And so there was a lot of organizations that were expecting small amounts of money from USAID that I think philanthropy can step in on. $20,000 here, $20,000 there for specific projects that are now just gone with the loss of USAID. So that's one area. The other is that Latin America is obviously heavily affected by climate change. It also has a big opportunity. There's a lot of opportunities going on there and innovations happening. And the staffer really felt like making sure that private philanthropy really focuses on, or just US philanthropy, I'm just going to say, focuses on NGOs that are working within the environment on solutions was a huge need because that's going to leave a huge gap and really make any progress we've made set us back around the environment. So that was one. And then the lastly was one that I found really interesting and hadn't really thought about was the work that the governments and USAID were working together to really combat cocaine farming. I mixed up what's cocoa and what's coca, so I'm not going to try to say that, but whatever it is that is made used for cocaine, and replace it with other lucrative farming opportunities for farmers. It was something USAID was really focusing on and doing a lot of great work on in partnership with governments there. And so finding organizations that are working on the ground that are doing the same work, I think is a way to sort of tackle a lot of elements at once. So those were my key takeaways.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, and we'll definitely expand on what we can do for locally led organizations. And there's a lot of talk of paradigm shift right now, and actually, what does that mean in tangible terms? We'll definitely delve into that as the conversation goes on. Turning to Monica, um, Monica, diaspora philanthropy has long been a vehicle for giving towards Latin America for decades, if not longer. Um, are you of the belief that it's time, this moment that we're in, is a time for Latin American diaspora to step up even more, and perhaps it's an opportunity to diversify funding sources?
Yes, yes, sure. Even if there are a lot of resources to Latin America, in general, based on my experience now with media, it's very more common that Europe, Asia, or Africa, they really have a lot of relationship with the diaspora. There are many reasons. I think that the language barrier is important because in the case of Latin America, we mainly speak Spanish, Portuguese. We have, of course, a big diaspora from the Caribbean, but in terms of identity, there is some segmentation. But I think that right now we are in a better moment than 10 or 20 years ago because we have two or three generations of four, or even three or four generations of people from Latin America in the US. The kids, they attended university in the US, they're paying taxes in the US, but they are still trying to look for a connection with the motherland of their parents. And this diaspora or this generation is very interesting because they pay taxes and they understand the culture of giving because that is something very important. No? For Latin America, it's not necessarily too easy to donate first because there are no good mechanisms. The governments, they are not offering a good tax exempt system, but also because culturally we have a lot of challenges and things to attend in our own country. But in the US, it's different. No, we really are more familiar with giving even $10 monthly. So I think that media now, yeah, or in general, no, we are trying to expand that idea to just share some methodologies like the giving circles, affinity groups, and just try to always support what the donors want to support, of course, if there are good causes, and also feeling that any organization, even if it's a small organization located in a remote area, that organization has the right to receive money if have any connection in the US. No, especially I am thinking a lot of cases of organizations in rural areas that they receive interns, they receive tourists, these people that they really love what they are seeing in that resort or in a environmental center or in a natural park, how that donor that is paying taxes in the US can give $10,000 to organization in Iquitos in the Amazon. No, if they know that there is this possibility, if they know that the diaspora has a tool to give abroad, I think we really will see in the future a lot of growth for Latin America. And I just want to add something related to what Molly mentioned in terms of the topics. I think it's absolutely important to discuss how, in the case of the Andean region, we have a very particular situation. No? If we talk about environmental issues, about how we can move money to the Amazon, of course, we're talking about deforestation. From a more traditional perspective, we know that there is a big conflict between farmers that are trying to expand their border, no, to have more money because it's more expensive a plot of land without a tree, no, because they have a lot of opportunity for monocrops, for cattle. But in the case of the Andean region, the conflict is different. Farmers, they are every day fighting to protect their borders against illicit crops. So it's a different kind of conflict, a different kind of situation. And this is why it's important to have a sophisticated approach when we talk about Latin America and climate justice, because we have a very particular case. And in this case, I am talking about Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, and in areas that we call in Spanish la ceja de selva, the eyebrow of the Amazon, because the eyebrow of the Amazon are the regions that really are more suitable for coca leaves. No, you cannot have coca leaves in Lima because it's a desert. So there is a very particular area where we remember, no, we have a lot of support from USAID and from other kind of international foundations, no, to have more cafe plantations, cocoa plantations, and alternative crops. And this is the area that now requires a lot of attention.
Thank you, Monica. You touch on so many points, and the word I'm going to pick up on is tools. And I think that's something that Mario is particularly interested in, I think, in cross-border giving and the challenges when it comes to both the regulatory challenges and cultural challenges. And Mario, I know you're interested in the role of technology of as a tool to simplify and accelerate cross-border giving um, towards Latin America. Could you paint a picture of the way something so universal can have some incredible localized solutions.
Yes, thanks, Shafi. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and thank you all for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. And yes, I think that despite the regulatory issues, that it might apply more to different or alternative income models for Latin American organizations, uh, comparing to individual giving. Despite that, I think that the opportunity is huge. But let me start by saying, like, as an overall, when we talk about long-term self-sustainability for organizations where cross-border giving, individual giving is one of the key ones, there are also other alternatives. So many organizations are building their own alternative models for creating income in a different ways. Regulations for that are maybe heavier or more difficult to struggle with, um, and not in the case of individual donors, local or cross-border ones. But also something that's not mentioned a lot, it's related to the use of technology for becoming more efficient, operationally speaking, how we are more efficient as organizations. So returning back to cross borders, what I think is that with the use of technology, if we can tackle two of these three alternatives of becoming self-sustainable, we will be okay. The opportunity for me is that you might be aware, but for, let's say, for example, Donar Online has 9,000 users, like 9,000 NGOs from all around the region. Simplifying or accelerating the use of technology for them to start using like cross-border giving, if you think about that individually, it would be like completely inefficient and completely unlikely to happen. So there is a big opportunity here for me of the roles of digital platforms that are already working, where, for example, such as Donar Online, where $1 invested in building or creating new features for the platform has an impact in 9,000 NGOs. And for every dollar invested, these NGOs raised $126 more. So it is difficult for an individual organization to build on this technology for cross-border giving or any kind of giving, but the role that tech products can play, it's completely useful, and I believe that in these days mostly it's a must. One last thing is that from October last year to these days, the last year almost, and especially after February, when the cuts get bigger, we have seen like a huge amount of cross-border giving in our platform. Before that, 95% of the individual givings were completely local. So people from one city donate to charities of that same city. And what we are learning and studying the data and with some research that we are doing is that local people but living abroad, as Monica was saying, are very likely to donate to their own resident or home place charities through the use of technology. So I think the challenge, it's big, but the opportunity is even bigger. We should tackle that in a way or another.
Thank you, Mara. That's fascinating. And with regards to the uptick in the last 6-7 months, could you give a percentage figure of that uptick since February?
It grew like, if I was, every new donation that came into the platform in the last 7 months, instead of the 95%, it was 85%, so 10 points less that came from individual giving from local and start coming from in the international way. That's on one hand. On the other hand, another thing that we have seen the data is that the one-shot donations also became bigger. We are promoters of the recurring donations, of course, because we think that provides long-term sustainability and financial predictability. However, we have seen many new donors donating larger amounts, but one-shot donations. And also there is an increase since this year of younger people donating that we haven't seen before the cuts. I'm not sure about the correlation between one thing and the other, but this is something that's already happening.
Monica, I'm interested and really intrigued when you said that there has been 2, 3, even 4 generations of Latin American diasporas around the world, and are we at a point there where there's a potential opportunity to share best practices with other parts of the world, such as Africa?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. In general, there was always the idea that, for example, a leader from Latin America won't be able to do fundraising in the US because maybe that person does not speak English, but I don't think that is true. First, because there are a lot of opportunities in the US to participate in different spaces, to attend conferences, to organize giving circles, and the audience or the public that they want to support Latin America, they speak in Spanish, or there is always in the room who can help with the translation. So I think this is my first message. If you really have the opportunity to do fundraising in person, to travel abroad, if you are invited by any foundation for a conference, because it's very common that people travel to the US for that, use that opportunity to talk to people and to let everybody know that even if there is an individual, a small restaurant and a small business, they have the possibility to support the organization. No, they have the possibility to find a tool to receive the money, and the money will be sent to their countries like Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, any country in the world, really. The second message is how we understand our audience. No, based on my experience, in my life experience, but also the professional experience. Now I see, for example, in the case of Colombia, there was a generation that left Colombia during the internal war, or at least during the worst moments of the internal war, no? Like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. That people, they are about to be retired. They are very connected with Colombia, but now they are looking forward to finding mechanisms to support their country because now they have enough money to share, and they don't have necessarily to connect or a very close connection with Colombia. No, I am talking about specifically diasporas because in the case of Colombia, Colombia was a very special case in Latin America. So if you are from Colombia or if you are working in topics that are very interested to this group, you can go to Miami and you can start a giving circle with the diaspora of Colombia, sharing what you are doing, trying to create maybe Zoom calls with communities that they are really doing an amazing work in Colombia. And there is a possibility for that donor or for that diaspora in Miami to talk to that specific character or person. Okay, so it's how we create these spaces between the diaspora that in which we are not providing regular information that they can find in YouTube. That people, they really would like to listen to stories, no? And there are many ways, especially now with the technology. The second case, talking, for example, about Argentina, we know that there are a lot of people from Argentina and Chile that they left these countries during the dictatorship or when they have a big economic collapse. It's the same case as many of them, they are in Washington, D.C., for example, or in other countries in the US. So how we really can create specific strategies to be close to these people that migrated many years ago, but they are still very connected with their country, but they don't have too much connection because they were spending 20 or 30 years developing their own professional careers. Now, maybe I am giving some specific examples, but I think if we have in this whole NGOs based in Latin America, I am pretty sure that they are looking forward to exploring mechanisms, very concrete mechanisms. No, giving circles, affinity groups are kind of the mechanisms that they can use. But there are also different tools, like we call like advice gigs, donor advice funds, giving pages. So I don't want to talk too much about the tools right now because maybe we will have more room, but I just want to remind everybody that it's not just one way of giving or receiving money. No, there are many tools.
It's such a good reminder, Monica. And Molly, I know you want to touch upon donor collaboratives as a driving force and perhaps, expand on there's been so much focus historically in Africa, but not on Latin America.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I think is we're seeing a little bit more uptick on is around donor collaboratives. And so a couple of years ago, it became very clear in my network of funders that there was a lot more donor collaboratives and just generally a lot more U.S. foundations funding in Africa and not in Latin America. And so in an effort to really try to change that and drive more funders to Latin America, we created what we're calling the Latin America Funders Collective, and it is with the Twingo Fund, Tinker Foundation. I see Caroline is on this call, and also Focus Central America. So Jody Ringel from Focus Central America. So 3 funders to Latin America that are really focused on trying to drive more funders there. And one of the things that we've done so far, so we're only about a year into this, and it's really the pilot is really these 3 organizations, and then we'll kind of see where this goes. But one of the things that we've done is we brought in a consultant to really help us to figure out where are there pockets of new funders that we might not be able to that might be open to funding in Latin America. Where are there new funders of Latin America that we might be able to engage with to try to give them, get them deeper and give them more information. And so we've done a couple of different learning series calls with funders. That was one of the ones I did with the USAID work. We've also done some direct one-to-one conversations with funders around giving them connections if they're interested in a specific issue area, that kind of a thing. And then the last thing we've been doing is doing some presentations with nonprofits around here's some tips for engaging with U.S. Foundations. So we've done a couple of those different are sort of the 3 big buckets that we have focused on so far. And we're sort of just at this place of seeing where this goes. But so far, there's been a lot of excitement and enthusiasm around it. So just excited to have this, this in place with the idea that we can hopefully just, bring in as many new funders to the region as possible.
Thank you, Molly. Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about the need to bring in new funders, and there's a funding crisis. I'm wondering whether something else is often not talked about is whether we have an information and accessibility gap, and how do funders and grantees think about the accessibility gap? Mario, the knowledge gap, I think, on the technological solutions geared towards philanthropy professionals and donors, there's still a long way to go, right? And how are you seeing the knowledge gap on the technological solutions, and how can we address that?
Yes, thank you. I think that we need to separate the civil society is huge, there are different type of organizations. So if we talk about the top 100 charities in Latin America, top 50, there is probably no big knowledge gap. It's more about the cultural gap in those cases that they might be willing to continue doing the things they have been doing in the last 20 years because it's what they do, they know, and they have been successful during the last years. But that's just the tip of the iceberg because there are so many others. I'm not sure which is the exact number of nonprofits in the region, but let's say there are close to 1 million. And we have like 1 million less 50 or 100 that they have a huge knowledge gap. This is not only on technology, but also knowledge about fundraising or professional staff and that. We have conducted the research for the second time in the last months together with the Tinker Foundation. We have been learning a lot about the customs, the way they are fundraising, if they have sustainability models or if they don't. One of the things that, for example, related to technology that we are seeing is like there is a knowledge gap on, for example, the use of the cryptocurrencies for fundraising. You know, I'm not gonna be like being a promoter of crypto donations, but let's say as an example, that's as Monica was saying, there is like a gap on getting to some new audiences. You know, it's like we are used to get to some of them. We have some training, some ideas on how to get to some people, but there are also many other communities and ecosystems. For example, the crypto community is a huge one in the world, and there is uh, research from the Giving Block that says that, for example, the average donation of a crypto donor it's $11,000. When if you see our one-shot donation on average in Latin America is close to $120. You know, it's like the difference is huge. It might be an opportunity. Yes, there's a knowledge gap on how to get to that community. Definitely, yes. We don't know who are these crypto guys, or how to get to them, or how we can offer them like an opportunity to invest in our causes and our impact. Having said that, and I will keep talking about audiences because I think there is where we have like an opportunity. Maybe depending on the cost that every organization has, there is an opportunity with, for example, entrepreneurs living in the US. In Latin America and Argentina specifically, we have so many unicorns making a lot of money in the US and Europe. All these companies or philanthropists, they are there and they might be willing to donate if a good access to donation opportunities come to them. That's a community, that's an ecosystem, the entrepreneurship ecosystem there, that we are not taking the most out of them. But just as an example, it's the same with scientists working and living in Europe or any other agencies as well. So if you ask me, Shafi, about how we can implement a solution effectively related to this, I think I mentioned before, but there is a role that platforms play here to not probably to help these top 50 international nonprofits. They have like greatest teams, but the great massive amount of NGOs working in the daily basis in the region is through this kind of platform that can introduce this technology and support in one effort thousands of works. And I wanted to mention one more thing related to this, that, for example, these top 100 charities in the world, like the Forbes top 100 charities, they have like a crypto adoption of 70%. If you ask the others, it's like 3%. It's like that gap is huge, and the opportunity on that is huge as well. Yeah, I think I can continue, but I will stop here and continue afterwards.
Thank you, Mary. That's really fascinating. I'll come back to you because there's a lot of points you raise. And there's a crossover, I think, with the focus beyond the largest grantees. And Monica, Latin American nonprofits and grantees in general, I think you're of the view that they're waiting for open calls and opportunities and information. What could you describe that kind of why that is and in what your what your view is that of the information gap that is currently in existence.
Yes, I think that is something that is difficult to resolve because almost now, I don't know, 90% of the organizations, of the philanthropic foundations in my network, we don't have open calls for projects. No? And if you're in Latin America, traditionally you wait for an open call and you want to compete. And the problem is if the door is already closed, you don't have even the possibility to knock that door, not to ask for some support. I think that is something that is more common in general here in the US. And the ways that we have to maybe reduce that kind of challenges is having these webinars. We are always open to meet people when, in the case of media, we have a very specific strategy of traveling abroad, being sponsors of conferences, talking to people, talking to organizations, but also talking a lot with our colleagues, trying to find referrals. I always suggest to review Foundation Center and Candid because there are some sections in that web where they can find information about open calls and opportunities. And I always suggest organizations to attend conferences that are not just related to the topic that they are working. For example, if I work in education, it's very common that organizations invest a lot of resources to participate in a conference about curriculum and methodology. But there are many conferences about philanthropy and education, no? So how you can really find spaces where you will have the opportunity to meet the network of philanthropists that are interested in education. I think that is something that now many philanthropic conferences are really open to have spaces for regular NGOs that they are not necessarily funders. But I think it's very important to allocate more resources to participate in these spaces now. And something that I would like to address, one of the challenges in Latin America for the transnational giving is there are many countries that they have a lot of legal restrictions to send money outside. For example, Brazil, Colombia, the easiest countries could be Panama, Uruguay. And this is why we love a lot of this alliance and coordination and relationship that we are building with donor online because we are exploring how we can support a donor, for example, that is located in Chile and that donor wants to support Colombia. There is a way how we can do that? Yes, no? And we have a lot of question marks, but our mission, our commitment is trying to find more mechanisms for that. But by now, with Myriad Alliance, we have established offices in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Singapore. We are covering Europe because we really believe that we want to provide tools for donors located in any country to send money abroad, no? With this idea of how important it is to have a commitment for social causes that are outside of our local borders. But I will be open to have any conversation in the future with the organizations that are now participating in this webinar, not to just go deep with these strategies.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, and actually just looking at the chat box, there's a lot of people interested in taking this conversation after this webinar, so it's really great to see. Just a reminder to our audience as well, please do send in your questions in the Slido box, and I will come to those towards the end of our session. Molly, could you touch on how to guide wealth advisors in particular and giving them the first steps to think about international giving?
Yeah, so this is a very timely topic because we, as part of what I mentioned before, the Latin America's Funders Collective, we sort of put our heads together and said, what is one of the major gaps between getting people to give their money and actually getting people to give internationally from the US, and then having the tools they need to actually do that. So what Monica was saying a little bit about, Marriott has all these different ways that you can do this. A perfect example is a wealth advisor or a philanthropic advisor in the US may have no idea what Marriott is and may have no idea that you can actually give from a donor advised fund internationally to an organization just by having a Friends of program that's a fiscal sponsor. And so one of the things that we decided was we were going to put pen to paper and actually create an international giving guide for targeted for new donors who are thinking about international giving, wealth advisors who may have clients who want to give internationally and don't know where to start, and philanthropic advisors as well who are thinking the same thing, with the idea that we could put, some very tangible information in there, tools, things like that, as well as inspirational information in there to really try to get people to be more open to giving internationally and to have what they need to actually do that. So that's not specifically focused on just Latin America, but it is focused on this concept around how do we get more US donors to give internationally. I'm currently in DC at a what's called the DAF Giving Summit. And we are launching the guide tomorrow there with a bunch of philanthropic and wealth advisors to say, hey, if you have clients interested in international giving, here's a resource you can use to get started. Jody's going to put it in the chat as well, a link to the guide, so you guys can all have it as a nice sneak peek. But you'll see that organizations like Myriad are mentioned there. Other organizations that work on making international giving more accessible are in there. Donor collaboratives. We've listed a lot of different resources with the idea that we want kind of one place that people can go around international giving from the US. So hopefully that will help in terms of the information gap that we know is there.
Thank you, Molly. Yeah, and my colleague Jody at Alliance Magazine has just popped in the link, so feel free to peruse that. It's super, super helpful. I just want to take us back to February, and Alliance Magazine reported on how USAID cuts had pushed some of Latin America's most marginalized communities to the brink, including, for example, the indigenous populations in Brazil, who already are beset by illegal gold mining and impoverished life at risk. I'm wondering all your thoughts on how philanthropy can pay particular attention to the environment, rural development programs, and indigenous communities, and in ways that doesn't just shift resources but power as well. Mario, perhaps you have thoughts on the role of technology, not just on funding, but in power.
Yes. No, if I have the magic wand for philanthropists and for the community of international donors, I would say that it's really time to invest on really making their grantees self-sustainable in the long term. It's like, for me, that's the key issue here. We have been hearing in many conferences and many spaces about the importance of what happens after the exit grants. And what we saw this year, I've been working on civil society for the last 18 years. And what we saw this year, it was something that we could have imagined that it could have happened, because there was not really intentionally a great investment on making these NGOs self-sustainable. So I don't want to be like not optimistic, but I think that's the main key, And I probably, the reason why I work on what I work is because I really believe that individual giving is part of the solution. It's not the only one, of course, but it's part. I also don't believe that diversifying options are the best path for all. It's like, let's pick two good income models for the organization. And with that, I'm promoting like a safe and effective operational models with shared services and using technology for being operationally and administrative more efficient. We could tackle part of the huge problem. And then one last reflection on this. I didn't mention before, but with cross-border and individual giving, for what data is showing us is that the opportunity is huge. The costs, despite the regulations, the costs are lowering consistently, and we are seeing many private companies doing cross-border payments without an issue. And we need to figure out how to do that effectively for the nonprofit sector with the same level of effectiveness, with those low costs, of course, complying with all regulations. I think it's something that we need to work seriously. I mentioned about the crypto opportunities, but I spoke more about the crypto donors, but there's also like using the crypto world or the blockchain for um, improving the cross-border payments. I don't want to become technical, but there are options on ramp and off ramp of the money from donors from all around the world. So the dream that Monica was saying, like someone from Chile that wants to donate in Colombia can be done easily, cheaper, and without many restrictions. I think that's possible. We are on our way to do that. I think together with Myriad and other partners, we will be able to do so. But I think something that it's important for us because the organizations culturally they already know about the importance. And this research that we just finished says that the organizations are open and looking forward to start new models of creating income that are sustainable in the long term. But they said that there are three things missing. One is the capital to invest in these strategies. Second is their teams, they are not fully trained with the necessary skills to address that. And then that the lawyers and the accountants and the board members tell them that there is fiscal and legal restrictions for doing so. And that's true, but it's also true that all these restrictions and barriers can be lowered. And I look forward to supporting on that too.
Thank you, Maro. That's super helpful, and the self-sustainability is really key. And I actually remember reading a report on media funding, and USAID cuts had hit Latin American media the most because of this reliance. I'm intrigued. There might be a possibility of these sensitivities of civil society and media, maybe using crypto and tech tools to become more self-sustainable. It's a potential, and it could be used. Monica, I wonder what your thoughts are, in particular with indigenous communities and rural communities, and how do funders access them in a way that empowers them?
Something interesting that is happening now in Latin America is a creation of funds based in the region. So it's the idea like the money is really going directly from an individual funder to Latin America, and there are organizations like Fondo Emerger in Colombia, Fondo Casa in Brazil, and other groups that they really have a lot of knowledge about how they can deliver the money to regions, to communities that really don't have a lot of access to internet, and that they just don't have the mechanisms not to administrate money in a long term because they don't have a basic infrastructure. So it's very important that funders also can check these regional funds based in the countries where they want to support. Myriad, we are working directly with these funds, but any donor can reach directly a regional fund if they want. No, I mentioned that there is a very amazing network, the Alianza de Fondos del Sur, for example, that have funds in Latin America, but also in Africa and in Asia. And I also see that now there are fondos territoriales. There are funds that are more created based in the geography, basically. Because traditionally, if you want to support the Amazon, of course, the money is going to organizations based in the capitals, and from that NGO, the money is delivered to different regions. But now there are new funds that are based, for example, in Manaus or in the Andean region. So they have more possibility to have a direct information and connection with the region itself. No? And that is a new opportunity because we're talking about many languages. No, we have a language barrier, but within the countries in Latin America, say just in Peru, I think we have maybe 25 languages. If we talk about Mexico, of course, we have many Maya languages, and that is one of the challenges. Something that we are trying to do is to provide interpreters. So if you are a donor in the US, you want to talk to someone that speaks Aymara, it's our responsibility as philanthropic foundations to find an interpreter who can really talk, interpret it in Aymara, but it's not necessarily easy to do that, but there are many mechanisms, there are many people, and this is our responsibility, basically, you know, to give the indigenous community the possibility to communicate themselves without any kind of restrictions, and to give the donors the possibility to also know more what is going on in the rural communities without too much mediation. But this is a very big challenge, you know, especially now that we are talking that we are going to have the COP very soon in Brazil, in Pará, which has been for many years the most deforested indigenous land in Latin America. It's very challenging in terms of the infrastructure because the city itself doesn't have no hotels to receive thousands of people. And now we are facing a lot of challenges because there are some reforms that the city is facing that will be against the mission of the COP, no? But I think I just would like that everybody can take time to explore if they can know more about what's going on in Para very soon, no? Because there will be a good opportunity to know more about these territorial funds or fondos territoriales, as I would say.
Thank you, Monica, for mentioning, especially the territorial funds as well. Really, really key parts of the infrastructure. We've got less than 10 minutes. Audience, please do send in your questions, and I'll get to them as soon as possible. Molly, as what's been touched upon, then there's been some comments in the chat as well on the need to invest in not just creating a strong NGOs, but the actual ecosystem and the surrounding infrastructure of the NGOs themselves. Tell us your experience of where that is and how we go about strengthening the ecosystem of Latin American nonprofit sector.
So, one of my, I'm just going to speak to my experience. My experience in finding really small, locally led organizations in Latin America sort of starts with people that I know that are already that are there. So I'm not asking, you know, people in the US, I'm asking people that I know that are on the ground. Once I found the organizations I wanted to connect with, the language barrier is a huge challenge for me. So personally, I don't speak Spanish. And most of the organizations I'm funding, they don't have anyone that speaks English. And so I was determined to figure out how we're going to do this. So there's a lot of pieces we brought in. We brought in a translator, or we just do a lot over Google Translate to try to make sure that we can, you know, connect. But to also help to bridge what the gap, I think, around the ecosystem and, you know, what exists, I think, in all regions, which is a small subset of organizations that consistently get visibility and get to attend, or, you know, conferences and things like that. One of the things that we do is we just we provide unrestricted funding. So that's one piece around trying to let these organizations spend some money on other things. But most of the organizations we're funding don't have, they want to spend it on the programs because they're so desperately trying to help people, and they don't want to take the money to go to attend a conference. So one of the things that I think funders can do, and one of the things that we've been doing, is we've been funding a bunch of our organizations to attend, you know, the Central America Donors Forum or different conferences that they've identified as places where they can then meet other funders to try to build the ecosystem, but also meet peer organizations to try to collaborate. So that's just a small thing I think that funders can do, but really trying to provide the space to get some of these organizations that, can't afford the $2,000 to $3,000 to go to these events, to give them the opportunity to go to the events and then try to make introductions, is I think something we can do to help strengthen the ecosystem, but more about just building a little bit more equitability across organizations.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, and equitability is a word that keeps cropping up, and I found a really interesting report from the Philanthropy Network Wings, which I'm sure many of us know of, and um, going back to actually the information space, there's a scarcity of data on the region despite its deep-rooted giving traditions. And without that fuller picture, Latin America and the Caribbean also remains undervalued and underutilized. And I'm kind of wondering how, particularly for civil society and foundations and academia, all part of the wider ecosystem, how can cross-border philanthropy contribute towards mapping and expanding the knowledge about what is essentially incredibly generous Latin America philanthropy system? And yeah, does anyone have thoughts on funding towards, particularly on the research of what's happening on the ground? Monica, anybody?
I can go. I can go.
Yeah, go for it.
And I can go with self-reflection. Like I'm mostly a social entrepreneur, so more a practitioner rather than a researcher. With this way of doing, I've done many things, most of the times guided by my guts or by my team's guts or some data about some digital product. However, in the last 4 or 5 years, we decided to create like a knowledge section within our ecosystems called Civic House, and this area is called Civic Compass. Start researching, changed everything on how do we plan, how do we conduct our new strategies, and that's something huge and important. I have to say that wouldn't have been possible without some international funders or international philanthropy, like in our case, Luminate or Tinker. This is something that hopefully many other organizations would have the opportunity to do so, but if not, probably we need to figure out how leaders of civil society would have at least time to read many of these reports. Sometimes I think that these reports and studies and researches are mostly for us, but they are a little bit far from many of the people in the field working. So maybe one of the paths to do so is to support these leaders to be focused on their impact on new alliances, on the work they are doing, and less on the fundraising strategies and how they can seduce a new international donor and all that. So how we can, as an international community, support these organizations to be more efficient internally, it might be a good way or a key to the success for them to be more aware about what's happening and reading data and making better decisions based on the research that it is already conducted.
Thank you, Mario. That's super helpful. We have a couple of minutes left. Would love to hear just some closing thoughts from all of you. Monica, I'll start with you, but We've spoken a lot about the past. Looking forward, maybe give us your one thing that you're incredibly hopeful for in the short to medium term on maybe something that you're seeing right now where philanthropic resources are being effectively mobilized and is being reached to those that need it most.
Well, education, health, they're always safe topics for donors. And I think if you really don't know or you are not sure about what country, about what topic, just choose safe topics, safe issues that you know that won't create a lot of challenges or conflicts. So it's very good that donors can really assume that they need maybe a learning curve, no? They can invest 1 or 2 years just supporting topics that are safe for them. And after that, they will have the opportunity to take more risks or to learn more, no? And I think you don't need to be too bold. If you want to support a good cause, just start with something that is that can make you feel comfortable as a donor, no? I think that is my message. And also remember for both sides, I don't want to be too technical, but you always can donate your retirement policy, your health, your life is insurance. You can put an NGO in your bequest. You can create legacy funds. Basically, there is not just cash. You can donate stocks. You can put the name of an NGO that you love in your life insurance. So how we can really use any mechanisms that we have in our hands to share. And maybe if you don't want to share money right now, maybe you can do that in 10 years, in 20 years. It doesn't matter. But the idea is like you always have the possibility to knock the doors of organizations like us to explore what I can do. I cannot do something now, but maybe in 10 years. I don't have cash, but I have a stall. I don't have a stall, but maybe I have a bequest. So whatever you want to do, we are here to support, no? And that is part of our mission, and we are happy with this role that we have in philanthropy.
Thank you, Monica, for that. We've run out of time, gone over time, but I just want to thank all our panelists, to Monica, to Molly, and Mario for joining us, and for everybody on this call also for joining us. Please keep the conversation going on any social platform that you're on, particularly on LinkedIn, and there's been lots of emails shared, so please do stay in touch. Thank you to Myriad Alliance, our partner today. We hope you've taken something away from this call. Thank you to my panelists as well for joining. We hope to see you soon. Take care.